Hello everyone. My hope is that this is a really fun video about domains and kingdoms. And specifically in this video, we're going to talk about the three domains that we use today for classification purposes versus the two domains that they used to use during the Linnaean time period. And then we're going to look at the different kingdoms that are within those domains. So let's get started. All right. So, firstly, we need to understand how organisms are classified into domains and kingdoms. So, like I said, in the times of Linnaeus, organisms were only classified into two groups. They were classified as either plants or animals. And as technology has developed and microscopes have become available, they have allowed scientists to look closer at organisms in terms of cell type and how many cells the organisms have. And this has really allowed scientists to further classify organisms into three domains instead of just two. So today we do use a three-domain system of classification, and those three domains that we classify organisms into are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And the organisms are placed into these domains and into kingdoms, which we'll talk about later on, based on cell type, meaning are they unicellular or multicellular, whether or not they can make their own food, are they autotrophs or heterotrophs, and the number of cells that are within their body, meaning do they have just one cell in their body or do they have multiple cells in their bodies? So that is how we classify organisms into domains and kingdoms. So over here, you're going to see that there are 6 kingdoms of life. The first kingdom is Animalia, then we have Plantae, Fungi, Protista, Eubacteria, and Archaebacteria. So we're going to look at those today. So the first domain that we need to talk about is the domain bacteria. So as you guys know, bacteria are found all around us, and they're really difficult to see without a microscope. So we know that they're there, but we can't see them, and so it's really difficult for us to kind of observe them on our own. So we can't really do that. We have a further description of the domain bacteria, and we know that some bacteria are autotrophs, meaning they are able to produce their own food, while other bacteria are heterotrophs, meaning they cannot produce their own food. They need to get food from another source. In addition to these characteristics of the domain bacteria, organisms within the domain bacteria are also considered prokaryotes. And prokaryotes are unicellular organisms, meaning they only have one cell. And this cell is unique because it actually lacks a nucleus. So we've not talked in any kind of detail about what a nucleus is. But a nucleus is the powerhouse of the cell. It's kind of like the brain of the cell. It has all of the instructions that the cell needs in order for it to carry out its activities or its daily functions. So nucleic acids are the chemical instructions that are found within the nucleus. So those are the chemical instructions that are passed on to the cell or given to the cell to tell the cell what it needs to do. So in prokaryotes, the nucleic acids or the chemical instructions of the cell are not contained within a nucleus. Ordinarily, in eukaryotes, which we'll see in just a little bit, they are contained within a nucleus. So prokaryotes are unicellular organisms that lack a nucleus. So not all unicellular organisms lack a nucleus, but some do. So prokaryotes are unicellular organisms that lack a nucleus. And within the domain bacteria, we see prokaryotes. Now let's look at the domain archaea. So it's important for you to understand what the word archaea means. So archaea comes from the Greek word for ancient. So archaea means ancient. And much like the domain bacteria, the domain archaea are also unicellular prokaryotes, meaning they are one-celled organisms that do not have a nucleus to house those nucleic acids. Within the domain archaea, we see organisms that are both autotrophs and heterotrophs, meaning some of the organisms produce their own food, so they are autotrophs, and some of them do not. They need to get their food from other sources, so those are heterotrophs. What's special about the domain Archaea is that these organisms live in very extreme environments. So they live in very, very hot conditions and very, very cold conditions. So for example, we find Archaea deep in the ocean where hot gases and molten rock actually spew out from vents in the ocean floor. And we see organisms within the domain Archaea living there. So this is just a microscopic image of an organism within the domain Archaea. The final domain is the domain Eukarya, which is where we find humans and other mammals. So eukaryotes are organisms whose cells do contain nuclei, meaning the cells do have a nucleus which houses the nucleic acids, and those nucleic acids are the chemical instructions for the cell, telling it what it needs to do on a daily basis. So over here I've given you a diagram of a cell, and we find the nucleus always at the very center of the cell. So here is our nucleus in blue here. And at the center of that nucleus is the nucleolus, which we're not really worried about right now. We're just worried about understanding that eukaryotes contain nuclei. The cells contain nuclei. They are what house those nucleic acids. So in essence, eukarya are more complex organisms than Archaea, than organisms in the domain Archaea and within the domain bacteria. So within the domain Eukarya, we actually classify organisms into 4 kingdoms. So remember, at the broadest level, we have domains, and then at the next level, we have kingdoms. So there are kingdoms within domains. So remember that we said that there are 6 kingdoms, and 4 of those kingdoms are within the domain Eukarya. So within the domain Eukarya, organisms are classified into 4 kingdoms. Those kingdoms are protists, fungi, plants, and animals. So we're going to take a look at each of those kingdoms right now. So protists are eukaryotic organisms. We just said that they are eukaryotes, or within the domain Eukarya. And any eukaryotic organism that cannot be classified is considered a protist. So we consider protists fungi and plants and animals. And some protists are autotrophs, meaning they produce their own food, while others are heterotrophs, meaning they get their food from other sources. We find that most protists are unicellular, meaning they just have one cell, while other protists are more advanced and they are multicellular, meaning they have multiple cells that are carrying out those functions of life. So we see a couple of different types of protists here, and you can see that we see some kind of bacteria-looking things, which is actually fungus, and then we also see plants and animals. So protists are anything that cannot be classified. Protists are anything that cannot be classified as a fungus, as a plant, or as an animal. So what we're seeing here in this picture is organisms that can't be classified as either a fungus, a plant, or an animal. So these are different types of protists here in this picture. Moving on, we also have the kingdom fungi. And within the kingdom fungi, we find mushrooms, molds, mildew, and most of these organisms are multicellular, meaning they have multiple cells carrying out the functions of life. Some of these organisms are unicellular, meaning they only have one cell that carries out all of the functions of life. Fungi are heterotrophs, meaning that they do not produce their own food. So most fungi feed by absorbing nutrients from dead or decaying organisms. We also have plants, and plants are multicellular. Most plants live on land, although some plants do live underwater. And plants are autotrophs, meaning they make their own food. So in this picture here, we see a variety of plants living on Earth. And then finally, we have the kingdom Animalia, or animals. And animals, as we know, are multicellular. They are heterotrophs, meaning they do not produce their own food, and they do live in diverse environments. So within the kingdom Animalia, we find lots of different organisms. We find zebras, we find lions, we find dogs, we find cats, all sorts of organisms within the kingdom Animalia. So this is just a short video going through the different domains that we classify organisms into, and then how those domains are further broken down into kingdoms. So please be on the lookout for another video that talks about how we use classification to better understand evolution. Thank you guys.